webinars, and webinars have actually delivered a lot, and they have made us busy, because we've been talking to each one of us through webinars, through Skype, through Zoom. So that is being very helpful. So this is a very good movement, and I welcome all the panelists and people who have joined us to this webinar on librarian leadership in management and productivity. I think this title says a lot, and especially of this times, it's very relevant that this subject is discussed. I remember 20 years ago when I moved from print books to digital e-books and e-journals. Everything was digital, and there was this buzz in the market. Oh, now we don't need librarians. That was very common those days. Oh, we don't need librarians because everything is digital, everything is online. But I think all that was farce, all that was a buzz, and not true at all. We do need librarians, we do need information professionals, and especially now we need more with the digital technology being around for so many years. We actually need expertise, and this subject becomes more relevant, definitely. So today we have a selection of very good panelists. We have I'll start with lady first. Ladies always first. So Dr. Medha Joshi, you're welcome. Dr. Joshi, we met 2 years ago in Bombay at ACS,
yes.
Conference, which was face to face, and not like this. So, but I'm sure even now, with social distancing, we are able to communicate and convey our message to the society where we are going, how we are going to really improve our library information system. So welcome, and I look forward to hearing you later in the day. And your topic I think is very, very important: ethics. And ethics is not a new subject. It has been there for many years, and we've been taught about ethics when we were young in schools. But I think now with digital technology, with more online information available, this has become more relevant, because there is more plagiarism, how to control that. And ethics would also require people who control in the universities to have knowledge about the various laws, which can protect people who are either caught or people who are penalized. How to penalize, I think, is a very, very crucial subject, and very difficult for a person to really monitor this. So I think ethics is a very, very interesting subject, and I look forward to hearing you later. We have Dr. H.S. Siddhamalia sir, who's a university librarian at RGUHS. He's a moderator. Welcome, sir, and look forward to hearing you on your expertise in maybe perhaps in medical science, medical resources. That will be very interesting. And especially now with COVID, I think medical science is getting more momentum, more attention of the government, and perhaps in the years to come, I think government may spend more money on health and hygiene. Then we have Dr. Anand Bhairappa, of course, a very well-known personality from corporate to academic institution. Welcome, Dr. Bhairappa. Look forward to listening to you. And again, your topic of today's webinar is research, data management. I think data management is getting a lot of momentum, and because we are producing more research, so having a data in a right perspective, I think, is very important. I mean, we have data already scattered in various forms, but I think we need to evolve kind of a standard so that each institution has a data set in a particular defined form, so that they are able to showcase that data to their advantage, to the funding agencies, to foreign universities, collaborators. And I think that's a very, very important subject today, data management. Then we have Dr. IRN Gowda sir, who is a former head of ICAST and at the National Aeronautical Laboratory. Those were very prestigious organizations that he has served, and has a lot of knowledge of so many years. And again, looking at the title visibility, because visibility for the research, I think, is very important, because you have data, but then how do you showcase that? How do you make it visible to the concerned authorities, to your researchers? So I think the subjects have been chosen very, very aptly, so that the whole concept is, defined and made it very clear to even young librarians who have joined us today, so that they can also take this forward in the future. So very interesting topic, Dr. Goddard, and I'll be, looking forward to hear you. And then last but not the least, Professor Sharath Ananthamurthy. He's a professor of physics, University of Hyderabad, and I'm happy that we have, apart from a librarian, a researcher, a professor who's part of this webinar. I think it gives a different perspective, perhaps. And his topic, researchers' expectation from the librarian leadership. I think this is a very, very important subject, definitely, especially now with COVID, because the expectations of the users have changed. The management is looking at differently. Many institutions have decided or likely to decide to go fully online, fully digital, and then obviously the librarians and the library management, how are they going to deliver? I think it's a very, very important, and there'll be a lot of new deliveries. Even we as vendors now have to learn that, okay, what is the expectation of a researcher at university, and how can companies like Balani Infotech can help in delivering those requirements. So I think this subject is very important, and also yes, because of the COVID, there could be shortage of funding. Government is only looking at austerity drive, and they are asking universities, can they really help the government and reduce the cost of not just library but the entire university, how they could function with the lower budgets, because government also needs money to look at health and hygiene, which is at this moment very important. So all the subjects that we have chosen, they are very, very relevant in today's time, and I think this discussion is going to be very interesting. And fortunately, I think there is enough time. Normally I've seen in webinars you have 1 hour, and then people are not able to express themselves in just 10-12 minutes. So I think there is enough time for each panelist, and then there's a moderator to really go into details, divulge and express yourself, so that the very purpose of this webinar is achieved. So I wish all of you all the very best, and thank you for your cooperation. Thank you for your time, for joining us today. And any guidance will be very kind of welcomed by us. We'll be very happy to learn from this webinar. As I said, that we also learn from the librarians, from the libraries, that what is needed, and then accordingly we bring those products. And we have been over the 20 years brought wonderful products, and hopefully in future also we will bring in products which are relevant for the library information science, so that libraries are able to give better services to their clients. So with these words, I would like to rest my welcome address here, and hand over the mic or the reins to Dr. Siddha Malliya. I heard that he could be delayed for some time. I don't know whether he's already there. Are you there, Dr. Siddha Malliya? Can you hear me?
No,
Hello?
sir, he's not here, sir.
Okay, so
Dr. Siddha Malliya had a small fall. He has gone to hospital to get it stitched.
Okay.
He'll be back anytime. He'll be joining us anytime.
Okay, so in the meantime, may I request you, Dr. Bhairappa, to take over and start the deliberations, and then once Dr. Siddha Malliya is back, he can take over from you. Hello? Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are, but I think Anand's mic is unmuted. He has to unmute himself.
Okay, Anandji, please unmute yourself.
I think we lost him because his video is very steady. There is nothing around.
Oh.
Please, I think one should SMS him or WhatsApp him to say that you have to be online.
Okay.
He will not realize otherwise.
Yeah. Okay, I'll do. Arjun, are you there?
Yeah, we are looking into it, sir.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Yes. So Dr. Medha, you must be busy nowadays with so many,
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
in the medical profession.
Yes, kind of.
Hmm.
Because I work for the National Cancer Grid, so we have some 200
Yes.
hospitals with us, more
I
than
know.
200.
Yeah.
And I need to support them and keep them updated on COVID and cancer patients
Right.
because they are the most vulnerable population.
Oh, yes. Very right.
And
Very right.
every cancer hospital is driving to its wits end to handle them.
Yeah,
You
true.
know, two treatments together, one has no treatment, one has a very rigorous treatment,
Very, yeah.
causes a lot of issues.
Hmm.
So I'm basically quite busy hunting information every day and sending it across.
Yeah.
Because I just cannot send them a whole bunch. I have to filter it for them and send.
Yes. Yeah. And that is what I said, that we have actually become busier,
Yeah.
Like when you were in office, okay, you work from maybe 9 to 6, 9
Yes.
to 7, and then you
Yeah.
have time for yourself. Now there is no time for
Sibala has
yourself.
come or no?
So,
Anand is back.
Okay, I'll start then.
Anand is back. Okay.
Okay, very good, sir. So take over. Thank you very much once again for this, your sharing your experiences with us, your time, which is we really appreciate this very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kailas. Thank you, Mr. Kailas Bala. So, four of us are here. We
Yeah.
hope to give justice to the topic of what you have provided. And Dr. Sidbalaya was supposed to moderate and continue this program. Unfortunately, he has a small medical emergency.
Oh,
He
sorry
will
about that.
come in. Yeah, he will come in anytime. But until he comes, so let me start the program so that
Please do that.
continue, kind of thing.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you so much.
yeah, if you come back to the topic, librarian leadership in research management and productivity. To discuss this, we are four here, four people, and Professor Sharath Anantamurthy, Dr. Ayaran Gaudar, Dr. Medha Joshi, and myself. And if you look at the combination of the people here, four of us, Professor Anantamurthy is a faculty who is a user of the content, and Dr. Ayaran Gaudar is known for enabling e-resources, lot of experience to bring in that point. Dr. Medha will talk about ethics aspect of the whole content library and all of that. And I have been asked to talk about generally about librarian leadership, what librarians can do or should do in this kind of a situation. And that is in the first part. And in the second part, I was asked to talk about research data management, particularly from librarians' point of view, how library can really look into research management as an area and how we can really scale up, position library as a research data management division and contribute to the organization. Now, since I was also slotted to talk first, so that is the moderation piece. Now, for my panelist view, I'll talk about librarians' leadership in research management and productivity in generally for about 3-4 minutes. Now, if you look at librarian leadership today, and most of us, at least the people, librarians who are attending, participating of my age, we were all trained to manage the libraries in the print world. So we were taught to do classification, we were taught to do cataloging, we were taught to manage all the print-based collection. The entire theory we studied, the practicals we did, our teachers, they taught, everything was mostly 99%. It was for the print-based collection. Now, if you look at scenario today, and the whole thing has given transformed. To give you an example, if you come to IISc library, we spend about close to 20 crores. And 19.2 crores last year we spent on digital content in the name of journals, databases, and all of that. Only about 60 to 70 lakhs we spent for the print books. What I mean to say is about 98 to 99% of the total spent today in bigger libraries is being spent on digital content and not on the print content. I think this scenario will be same if you check with IIT Madras, IIT Bombay, IIT Delhi. My friends are working there. We know that more or less, at least first generation IITs and IISc, all of us, we are into this situation. We completely transformed the collection, or the publishing industry itself got transformed from print to electronic. So even if you want to really get print-based journal, it's very difficult to really get a print copy of the journal from international publishers. That's how it's transformed. So my point is, librarian leadership is required to handle this transformed age. So you are no more looking at writing reminders to publisher, you're no more looking at payment follow-up and all of that. A lot of things have been really become a lot simpler now. And you need to really ask yourself what are the value addition you can and how we can really make it more useful to the faculty and researchers. And what are the value added services you can really offer in terms of pushing the content to end users in the name of students, research scholars and faculty. So that is about the content. Now if you look at services, if you look at 10 years back, 15 years back, if you go to any big library, everybody talks about traditional services like book circulation, photocopy service, table of content service, journals content service and all these things. Now today, so everything is digital. You don't need to really send table of contents. Our faculty, researchers, they know the journal before we know about that, because they always go to the website, they get the content, will be happy to really look at all of that. Now, so what is that value addition you can really give? That's the question you need to really look at. And so if you look at library holistically, library will have three components. One is content in terms of books databases. The other thing is the user base in terms of students, faculty and researchers. Third component is services. We extend services as a library staff. We should extend services to the faculty, students and researchers by using the content subscription. So all three areas got really transformed. So content is being transformed. Users are really digital savvy. I mean, 15, 20 years back, users, the only option to learn new thing was sit in the class, listen to your class teacher, or come to the library, take the book or a journal, read. That was there were only two options to learn things in the higher education system. Today, teacher has become insignificant for many students. Has become insignificant for many students. To put it the other way, there are many ways, many ways for end users to really get access to the information what they want. But of course, what kind of a content they get online, whether it's a quality content or not, that's a different story. But for end users, libraries have become from critical to have to nice to have. I think it's very important to understand these dynamics. And in this kind of a crisis situation or a transformation stage, it's important to have a librarian leadership. It's important to really look at the transformations, see how you can really train your staff, how you can position your library, so that your end users will exploit all the content what you have and carve out some special services and all of that. And areas where librarians can really excel so that we can be more useful to the faculty and researchers is, now say for example, you need to come out with a new type of value added services. Just giving circulation, just giving photocopy services and all, they are not helpful. Get into some peripheral areas where we can use the content what we are subscribing to, design value added services and reach the scholars, community, faculty and all of that. That is really required. So if you really look at the libraries and librarians perception and all of that, in university system, librarians are really positioned very well in my opinion. Librarian position is really strategic and you can really do a lot of leadership roles being just a university librarian. If you look at that position, you are a permanent HOD, you are a Senate member, you have a chance to really interact with all HODs and all people. You always easy to understand the pulse of the organization, our plans, future plans and all of that. So these inputs will really help librarian to really, plan their resources, carve out the new services and positioning library in such a way that your end users in your institution, they need not go anywhere else to really get the content what you want. I think that's a big challenge for us. And the other challenge I see today is the interaction between the library staff and the faculty has significantly come down. So because your role as a intermediator has come down. See, in the print world, librarian's role was very, very critical. Lot of work. If you are subscribing to say 200 journals, your journal subscription department will have not less than 15-20 people. So much of work, go get journals, do all of that. And faculty used to depend on librarian to really release that each print issue. They were waiting. They remember all the library staff, everybody, because once in a week, everybody comes to library, they stand there, they take it. Today, the digital revolution has made library and library staff insignificant. So you are not that critical to them. But of course, you need to really figure out where you can really bring in value, how we can really add value, what are the things we can really deliver to end users, faculty, and what are the things we can deliver at organization level. All these things, a lot of scope here. So managing digital content is not an easy one. None of us were really trained to manage digital content in libraries. We were all based on our learnings, whatever we learned in 15-20 years back schools. Today, digital management content is very different. Many of us, we don't know how to do the licensing. Many of us don't know how to really develop the content in a meaningful way. Now, very often, libraries don't have a required content in their collections. We all go by what, most of the times what publishers push, what aggregators push. Sometimes, they also sound very attractive, saying that, okay, you pay for these 10 journals, we'll give you remaining 35 journals free. It sounds attractive for you. That's how we ended up having, more content, but in that content, how much of that content is really useful to your organization? I think these are the questions we need to really ask, and the librarian should really get into that and do. This is the time which is really, really critical for librarians to prove their meta. And as I said, librarians, as an individual, you have already become insignificant to end user community because of the digital content. I think we should make use of the same digital content, carve out the new value-added services, and give value-added services to end users. At organization level, do the better licensing, get more content for less cost, participate in consortium, have a better rules and regulations and clauses and all of that. So there is a very, very significant role to play, but I think we need to really transform ourselves from getting trained from print-based collection to the digital-based content kind of thing. So that's the couple of points I wanted to talk about librarian leadership. So with that, I will request next panelist, Professor Sharath Ananthamurthy, to talk about 5-10 minutes to set the context for his topic.
So, have I unmuted myself?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
You can hear me. That's very
yes,
nice.
We can.
Professor Bhairappa, Professor Ishwar Gaudar, the CEO of this very nice company. First of all, I must thank you for seeing me as a co-participant and someone who can hopefully give you some information and as well as my own opinions coming from a different perspective. I'd like to keep what Professor Bhairappa said very eloquently and very aptly here. And so let me make the points I have to make in terms of a small presentation that I wish to share. So I'll just go to my screen and do it. Since I have headphones, I'm always a little anxious about my audibility because I can only hear myself here. So I suppose you can all hear me. Okay? So,
yes, very much.
Right. Okay. So there we are. And right. Yeah. So, well, before I say that, I must also mention that my invitation into the library scenario and its extremely active environment was through Professor Ishwar Gaudar, and I must thank him for this opportunity as well. He sort of played the role as a lone crusader, I must say, in making the library so central to some of our activities, especially when I taught at the public university in Bangalore. And I really think that the possibilities of this wonderful space became apparent at the time to me. And so I'm really happy to see Professor Gaudar here as well. But let me, without belaboring, come to what I would like to say. Well, I don't want to belabor too much on this, but you all are aware of the formal role that the library used to play more as a physical space for students of most disciplines, largely humanities and social science, I would say, because most of us science types were quietly locked up in our labs or really not using the library too much as it ought to be. And here I'm talking about my experience coming from a state-funded university in Karnataka previously. And many times the complaints were about cataloging being disrupted, books being deliberately misplaced, and so on. And of course, today we are moved from that, from the notion of library as a physical space to, as what Professor Bhairappa says, something which is more in the virtual domain. So therefore, one has to address the library more as an evolving space. Yeah. So I'd say this to put it succinctly, that there's a need to shift from the library as a repository of knowledge to an active facilitator in the knowledge creation process. And here I may be a bit ambitious, and probably I know that most of you will intervene and say, oh, but this is a long way in coming. But I suspect that before we realize this, and with the global competition that we face, this is probably going to be a scenario where the library will need to address this if it should not lose its relevance. And what do I mean by active facilitator? Following, I envision that the future librarians or the team of librarians will have the capacity to train and integrate knowledge facilitators into particular research programs. Now, what do I mean by this? What I mean is particularly that if you have active groups who are contributing very well to the institution's research output, you can plant, in a manner of speaking, a facilitator. A facilitator will be someone who has a very quick capacity to get a basic idea of problem, collaborate with the research team for gaining insights, and that will be through observing, intervening, and learning. And finally, with this, armed with this kind of knowledge, would be an arranger of the materials and suggest materials. Now, that's a very important aspect, because in my experience, having worked with my students as well as my own problems, I must admit, is many times we are stumped with the enormous uphill task of what is relevant to drive my research, what materials is really relevant to drive my research, where are the new insights, and more importantly, if I actually go to the process of knowledge creation in my research, where not only am I feeding into the paradigm of what is relevant, but I'm also trying to create new knowledge. Here, I'm really stumped with often the questions that come from other disciplines. So today we have an evolution from what is strictly multidisciplinary, or used to be, to interdisciplinary bounds, where and the distinction between these is also often confused. So today I actually looked up some references. There's a very good NIH paper that discusses the difference in these three approaches. And often I feel that we are still, most of the research, at least that my colleagues and do, is at best multidisciplinary, where we are basically within the bounds of our own confined discipline, but we are accessing each other's knowledge. But today, as you know, the need is actually for interdisciplinarity, because you need to actually take ideas from others and make a seamless integration of the different disciplinary bounds, or break the bounds, as it were. And this is a more difficult task. And often the questions that are available in other disciplines, the language of investigation is itself masked in some kind of mystery. And I think a knowledge facilitator creates the connections between these barriers. I certainly feel that in the absence of another institution doing this, the library acquires a new role. Of course, transdisciplinary research is much more the needed direction in which we need to proceed. And if you look at any of the pressing problems we face today, they all require transdisciplinarity. Look at the COVID crisis itself. It's not enough for us to be just biologists here. The COVID crisis is such a large and looming crisis, not only in the health, but also in our consciousness. And therefore, transdisciplinary approaches become necessary. I see library facilitators in active roles in this process. Finally, I'd like to say something, and here I know I'm very abstract and a bit philosophical, because that the actual nitty-gritty of how this is done will be addressed by my co-participants who are much more experienced. Is actually, I think there's a role for philosophers. There's a role for philosophers because today actually needs a deep understanding of how knowledge production happens and what are the theories of it, to understand why paradigm shifts take place, even within a discipline, and on a larger scale, why knowledge shifts take place. What is the process of scientific revolution? And today, I think we are on the verge of a scientific revolution. We are on the verge of actually thinking in new ways on a lot of things that we used to think about and thought we understood. I think, therefore, the pedagogy of library science needs to be restructured. needs to be much more than simply a place where you are producing useful material, to a place where actual active intervention in knowledge creation is going to happen. Today, there's, of course, the urgent requirement of translational research. And translational research is a buzzword that we all like to talk about, but no one really has actively realized this necessity. And I'll leave it as a question because I don't think I have ready answers as to the role of the library in producing translational research. So these are my thoughts on how I envision the librarian to have an increasing relevance in my life as a researcher, producing knowledge, and also to keep it nimble-footed and to rise to the current occasions and scenario that is so demanding today in this global world of competitive knowledge production. So thank you very much. That's the end of my talk.
Thank you, Professor. You aptly said the role of librarian and library should shift from, repository centric to process of creating knowledge. You rightly said that really talks a lot about us, and we can do brainstorming and really aim to get into that area. And I'm thinking, should we keep floor open for questions once we complete the remaining two? Okay, Dr. Gowder is suggesting that let's have one round complete. Now, so by thanking Professor Anant Sharath Ananthamurthy, I am requesting Dr. Gowder to share his views for next 5 minutes.
Can I request Professor Sharath Ananthamurthy to?
Yeah. I'll stop the screen sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay, yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are. Go ahead, sir. You are audible.
Okay. At the very outset, let me thank Mr. Kailash Balani and Dr. H.S. Siddamalaya for the wonderful opportunity given. In fact, Mr. Balani had given such another opportunity, of course, physically in an ACS meeting in Bangalore. The other panelists are also going to be there. There's Medha Joshi. Of course, Anand is to talk a little bit about his topic. When we were, myself and Siddamalaya were discussing how we should go about it, etc. When we think about Indian's role or his leadership role in research management and productivity, is a huge thing. We can't totally cover every aspect of it. Of course, Anand and Professor Ananthamurthy told in their own way few aspects of that. Basically, how we are sensitizing ourselves in the present context. Then I thought, okay, let me start generally and then switch over to my specific topic. That is boosting the visibility and the impact of research. I will start sharing my PPT. Is it okay? Okay. My topic, as already mentioned, is boosting the visibility and the impact of research. Well, let me set the context. Enhancing the discoverability and the visibility of the research boost the researchers' drive for the new things. And when we talk about impact, impact is something which is beyond academia. Whatever we think out of the research product, it could be economy or society or culture or something of the kind. And the funding agencies also expect the impact and a return on investment. When we think about the research cycle, that's the entire research process, there are various stages. Library people definitely can play a major role, at least in some aspects of research management. Starting with choosing the research topic or literature search or literature review. In fact, even suggesting a suitable title for publishing to the authors, plagiarism checking, and quantification of quality of research, and awareness, certainly awareness about the H index, altmetrics, antimetrics, and there are a lot many things of that kind. Well, there was a quote, I am reading it. Librarians as navigators and guides central to unleashing the intellectual potential of the scholarly community. We need to stand with that. When we think about increasing the visibility and the impact of research, we can think it in 4 steps. One is first one is to the subject, and next one is discoverability. It could be paper or anything of that kind. Then increase the dissemination among the public, among the other researchers, and a lot more things. And then follow, curate, and tell your story. That is a researcher's story. A number of ways of discoverability. As you are aware, search engines like Google, they expect us to do rather optimize our whatever we be out of an article, keywords or a title or headings, abstract, etc. For example, like the example of title. The Google displays the first 55 characters of the title. So whenever we write the title of an article, we should take care of that. That first important keywords in the title occur in the 55 characters. Likewise, if that is the case, at least the title of the figure or the image, if they are with some keywords which are useful for identifying the topic of the paper, that would be it. Now, the other thing is making article more discoverable. Well, everybody talks about that we have to publish in quality journals. Definitely, library quality journal area of research. How we can help them? We are library people we are quite familiar with factors like or the Scopus and Web of Science, PubMed, lot many things. What we say, the concerned journal's impact factor value should be good. The concerned journal would have been indexed by Scopus and Web of Science and PubMed, etc. If we are not in a position to have access to that, at least Simago journal ranking is open access. We can visit that and search for the journals which are in our area of research, even the specific area of our research, and that arranges the journals in the decreasing order of SJR1. So we can decide where to publish, which one to. Or even most of the well-known publishers like Elsevier, etc., they have got their own journal finders. We can make use of that. Probably this sort of things are very well known to library professionals. And most next is very important one, that is prefer open access publishing, and we should prefer open access journal. Some of the publishers, apart from having purely open access journals, they have a hybrid journals as well, partly open access, partly commercial, that sort of things. There are some green open access or gold open access, etc. But ultimately, the advantages of going for open access journals is early visibility, quality visibility, usage visibility, etc. And what is done, we send the paper for publishing initially. It gets reviewed, etc. We make some changes. Finally, we send the reviewed PDF part from our side to the publishers back. So usually, most of the well-known publishers allow to deposit this sort of PDF file to our institutional repository. Institutional repository, by nature, they are open access, in open access. So a better visibility for our research as well. So another important thing is nowadays the funding agencies we are required to mention in the paper. That will really help. It gives a visibility for the concerned funding agency. It also gives our visibility as well. This is choice of journals for publishing. I don't want to go into the too much details of that. Only thing is I would like to mention that we should avoid predatory journals. That's very, very important, especially in the Indian context, because India is well known for publishing predatory journals. We should avoid them. I'll skip this slide. Next is further dissemination of the research output or whatever it is. We can think of becoming members of professional associations. We should attend scientific committees. We can become the reviewer of journal, contact with the funding agencies, and also get in touch with the peers, etc. Participate and present paper in conferences and share them further. And another important thing is most of the journals use DOI, that is a document identifier number. If we know that the document identifier address, it is enough to get into that particular address of the paper. Another important thing is these commercial publishers take away our copyrights. As far as possible, we should try to retain the copyrights with us. These open access journals, the question does not arise anyway. The departmental seminars we should conduct, we should attend. We should have journal clubs, outreach related societal activities, etc. Upload the related PPT. Suppose you have got some research output, you have published a paper, you have made a presentation of that particular paper in some conference, you must be having PPTs. We can't upload that sort of things to SlideShare, etc. And we can think of starting a blog and writing about the research findings. And again, researchers, if they partner, as Professor Ananthamurthy just now told, if the researchers can partner with the library for innovative ideas about visibility, that would be a good thing. It's a mutual thing. And definitely library people are quite knowledgeable in terms of some of these ideas for giving the better visibility for the research. Write about the research in trade magazines. This is one other thing, usually most of these researchers never think about it, especially in the engineering area, even for that matter, medical area. A lot of trade magazines are there. We can think of writing a small general article on our research. Then publishers' website, this is another thing. Every publishers along with the in the particular journal's website, they give links for sharing through social media. Whenever we read our own article, whenever we open the concerned article in the publisher side, we can use the sharing facility through maybe at Twitter or something of that kind. You can share with your contacts. These are some of the sites or the networks popular among the researchers. That is social media things like Google Scholar, ResearchGate, and Twitter, and Research Society. And I have given mentioned here like that. This is a study out of that 61% people use this one and 48% like this. A lot of things are there. Okay. Next and final step is follow your research and the citations, etc. Curate and tell a story about your research. Link your publications with different affiliations. Track author's name and affiliation. Check findings for duplication, outdated, improved, etc. One another thing is we should also think about whether there are any applications for our research work, whatever we have published. Say if it is a medical science, whether it has got some clinical application. If it is engineering, whether it has got some industry-related applications. We can think about that sort of things as well. Look for similar works by others and collaborate. This is very, very important. See, what we do is we simply publish and forget it. We never bother to see what others are doing in the same area. Or there could be other people who are citing our article and they'll be working in our area. You should see what they are doing, etc., and try to establish possible collaboration with those people. Another thing is some of these indexing and abstracting services and citation databases like Scopus, Web of Science, etc., they have alert facility. As an institution, we can set up the alerts, or as an individual also you can set up the alerts in those index data bases, so that whenever there is something of interest to us or something concerned to our publication, you get an alert, and track the citations to your work using citation databases. One is, I was as already told once earlier, that you publish something, it is cited by say 10, 20, 100 people. Why do they cite your article? There is some commonality between your work or their work, or they're using your work for something else. So you should try to follow their work as well. Then look for H index, I10 index using Scopus, etc. Next one is follow your work or social engagement. Track for views. This is another very interesting recent there's something called altmetrics that has come up. This alternative metrics. We were obsessed with the H index. We were obsessed with the I10 index and lot many things of that kind. But you know what happens once you think of going for H index, etc. You don't get the value for that unless somebody cites your article and that gets added to your citations, and thereby your H index goes up, etc. You can't. Visibility is not immediate. On the other hand, altmetrics has come up within a few days or few weeks of your publication. Your visibility is seen. How many times somebody visits it, somebody downloads it, somebody gives comments, etc. You will have all those things. There is another one called Plum Analytics. These are all the systems. Quite a good number of publishers are making use of this altmetrics and Plum Analytics. For example, if you go to Nature, you get Plum Analytics. Or how many times you are tweeted by Twitter, how many times you are visited by so and so. That sort of impact story. There's another one. Engage academic social media like ResearchGate and Academia. I already told about site as you like. Okay, look for saves to reference management tools like Mendeley. This is very most important. Mendeley is something which is very, very important. In fact, when as you are pay 75 million dollars purchase this, you can imagine the importance of this particular tool. This is a wonderful open access tool. It not just helps you for referencing, it helps you to maintain your research, starting research scholar to even to the end. Okay. Track mentions in social media like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. LinkedIn is becoming very popular, especially for among the researchers. Recommendations through fish, quick share, comments on platforms like PubMed, Commons, etc. As a whole, open access supplemented with social media is becoming a competitive advantage for even for the librarians and for the researchers. But then citation counts and beyond. It's not just citation counts and it's beyond. What is that? Beyond counts, identifying tangible and meaningful outcomes, justification of taxpayers' money for spending on research, convincing the funding agency for further research, for getting further research. What is the outcome? Contribution to knowledge base, understanding societal, industrial, clinical issues and possible solutions, change in clinical or the chemical and other practices for better treatment of the product. Well, I've almost come to the end of my presentation. So I simply give some of the examples wherein the libraries have played a major role in supporting the research-related activities. One example is Rhodes University Library. They have come out with this sort of things. What are we doing to raise the research visibility and why? There are questions they have tried to answer these questions. For example, what they have done is they have opened a Twitter account for every discipline in the concerned university. For example, Twitter account for the pharmacology, or something of that kind they have done. Anyway, next slide, I will show you that concerned list as well. Then subject-related Twitter accounts for retweeting purposes. See, tweeting is something, retweeting for somebody tweets my own type tweet. That's a wonderful thing that really works for us. Embedded subject-related Twitter accounts, like like LibGuides is another important development. It's a big contribution from library side, which is really a big boon for the researchers. Subject blogs, Rhodes Library, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So this is the, for example, this is the subject-related Twitter accounts of Rhodes University Library. See, altmetrics are a natural extension of what libraries and librarians already do. It only means that whatever we are trying to do is a sort of a little bit extension of our routine role. This is what it says. Finally, I would like to, before I conclude, I would like to say that during my talk, I mentioned the different steps to be followed to getting the better visibility and better impact for our research. Various steps I mentioned. Libraries can play a major role. The library leadership can really do a wonderful thing by joining hands with the researchers in every step of the research activity. Anyway, I will conclude with the quote by Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the more intelligent. It is the one that is adaptable to the change. With this, I will end my presentation. Thanks for listening. Anyway, I will be happy to answer your questions in the later part of the program. Thank you, Valani sir. Thank you, Anand.
Thank you, sir. It was a very detailed presentation on how to increase the visibility of the research paper. And many of us should know that just writing a paper and publishing is not enough. And you have a lot of work even after that. So thank you for giving steps, tricks, and also the tools to make that happen. And now, so I request Dr. Medha Joshi to take 5-10 minutes and express our views and thoughts on ethics related to research. Madam, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I have been given, I have been given to talk on ethics, which is a very complex thing actually, if you see in terms of research, and especially so from a background from where I come, and that is medical sciences and biomedical sciences. However, I will try and put into a nutshell what it actually does when you do research, and perhaps the same principles get applied everywhere in every kind of research that you do. Professor Sharath has already said that it has to be interdisciplinary research, and we have seen the best of interdisciplinary research in medical sciences when we had collaborated with IITs and DARCs to have our equipments in place. Am I audible? I see a lot of... No, I can't hear you, Anand. Unmute yourself. Okay, and I would want to share few
Okay,
slides.
I am not sure. I mean, are you presenting your slides or we are still?
No, this is somebody else's slides.
I request Dr. Gowder to close his PPT and also unshare that file. Okay, now you can share your.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see my slides? Can you see my slides, Anand?
Yes, I can. I see.
Great.
Only thing is you need to blow it up. Go for a full screen mode.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did.
You're perfect now.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead, madam.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So now research ethics, when we say, so first understand ethics. Ethics is philosophy. It's about good over bad, right over wrong, understanding what is required in every stage. So right since we conceptualize a research question, the ethics starts building in. Whatever topic, whatever domain it is, it start building it, because we would want to do a very good and appropriate and applicable research at the end. That's what we have, earlier speakers have already told us, that we need to have applicability in what we do. And in good applicability means a research was done in very ethical manner, where we had always the right things considered, and wherever we found it was going wrong, we stopped. So the onus is on the investigator to look at this. So that is what it is about ethics in per se. So ethics means when it talks about the environment, we need to consider our infrastructure, what is my scope, who are the contributors, how qualified are they to do this kind of research, whether they are recruiting NEPD, how is the administration going, will they document everything? Because we always say in ethics that if you have done, you must document, and if you have done but not documented, means you have not done. So the process is to be documented. So that means keep transparency in whatever we are doing and follow the research methodology which we have already established. So we don't divert from there, and if we divert, we need to document and make a sense of that. So it is about management of the processes, documenting the processes, documenting the stage-wise outcomes that we get, and at the end presenting it in a most ethical format. So right from conception till publication, the ethics is embedded into your research. So if your protocol or research methods does not get into these small areas, that means the research is biased and may not be done ethically. So that is what it is about. The governance, the whole process is about the ethics of the research. So when we look at, what's this? What happened to my screen? Some problem with me. Okay, I'll stop share and reshare, please. Huh?
Madam, you can share afresh once again.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Am I thrown out of that? I don't know. Can you see my slides? No, na? I think, okay. Share this again. I don't know, it threw me out. Okay. So this is what I was talking about. And when we see of this, so there is research ethics everywhere. In medical ethics, it becomes more of a rigor because there is some human element embedded into it. So there are human people who are participant into that experiment that is being done, is being conducted on them. So the four major pillars of medical ethics is autonomy to the participant, beneficence of the participant, and beneficence means not only in terms of health, but socio-economic, cultural, and any other format, that is mental, all other format of health and other issues also to be protected. Non-maleficence, that the duty is not done in a wrong manner, and justice, that means we have justice. So there should be no bias in selecting whatever research outcome comes is distributed equally to all the participants. That is what is medical research about, and therefore there is a rigor of reviewing of research through a committee which is called an International Institutional Ethics Committee or Institutional Review Board. There are several names for that, and it becomes very thin, and everybody is a member to that. I don't know why this doesn't go. Okay.
Maybe you can do a page down.
Okay, let me try that now. Okay, so this is what it is about. So the EC process is about different things. First is that you write a project and submit it for review. When with all the supporting documents, that means if you are going to advertise your review, your research for participants to come forward, then that advertisement also has to be submitted. If you are using a particular drug, then the information about the drug leaflet should be submitted for the ethics committee to review. Why? Because the ethics committee's basic objective is to protect the participant. So members review the submissions, and then the decisions about approval or modification to research is given. So what? The library can submit into two things. When they begin to write, they need to have a lot of information about the guidelines, about the regulations, about the research methods that have been conducted, what is the different kind of literature, what different type of studies on the similar topic have been done, and what was their criteria of or methods of research. Information on that, because unless that is placed, the research not be written and it cannot go forward. While writing this, they will have to see that there is no bias in selection, no bias in data collection, no bias in data analysis, no bias in infrastructure that is being given. There is no conflict of the investigator or of the authorities or of the participants into it. Conflicts can be of several types. Conflicts because I am party on board of director of some company. See, this can be related to different domains also. The conflicts can come of financial. Conflicts can come of superiority. Conflicts can come because I have worked on certain things, or conflicts can come because just I have been there and I need to operate and do work things and I support certain infrastructure, so I would want to do that. So there are different kinds of conflicts. You can have a complete talk on how conflicts can be. So conflicts are going to be there, how they are organized and managed while doing the study so that they don't interfere with the processes and the outcome. That's very important, and that's an information an investigator will always require or a researcher requires. So libraries can work on these things and help them write the protocol. When they come to the decision and when they start writing their research outcome or a research report, that's the time again they will need literature. What has been done up till now? Is there any evidence of this kind of an outcome anywhere in the literature? Has somebody done it? What has been the difference? How comparable it is to the earlier outputs? This literature survey has also been. Apart from that, there will be publication ethics. So you need to advise them on publication, on authorship, on how credits are to be given, how acknowledgements are to be given. All these things are required. And this is how, when you get involved in this process of research, you can support this thing by through literature review. and conduct. So you need all these things, the literature review at both the ends, in the beginning and at the end, and in between for the ethics committee members. So this is what happens. So no research in medicine is initiated if it is not approved. And nowadays, any research that you take has to be registered with the government agencies. Unless that is registered, you cannot even go to the ethics committees for review. So this becomes very difficult. So it is about honesty in how you conduct the research, responsibility for what you're doing and the outcome, ensuring accountability. You know, we talked about interdisciplinary research and multidisciplinary research. Now, when you do this research, there are expertise from different fields who will come up on board and contribute to the research in their own capacity and for their own share of expertise that the research product question needs. So everybody becomes responsible. But amongst them, there is one person from whom the idea came up forward, and where he collaborated with different people to do the research, and that person becomes solely responsible. So it's person's responsibility to see that his collaborators are also doing their jobs and are delivering in time. But research means it's not only research, doing it on timely basis, supporting, having transparency and publications is all important, and whatever you do must be made available to the society for whom you work. That is the concept of research and outcome, and that's where ethics plays a role. So this is transparency, avoiding bias of any kind. So this is, bias can be different. You know, you pick up some samples, you don't pick up some samples, so you have selected samples differently. In medicine, it becomes very, very critical. Sometimes when you are doing some measuring instruments or doing things, and if you have not calibrated it, then the bias can set in, because that particular company can do something like this for you. So this is how the bias can come in infrastructure, bias can come in data collection, bias can come in selection of samples, whatever they are. So we have to be very sure, and declaration of whatever is being observed and a conflict of interest upfront before you start on your research, and also explaining how this conflict is going to be managed throughout the process. That is what we need to do. So it is this ensures what data is reliably collected. It is observed optimally using relevant approvals. There is efficiency in work. There is expertise there. There is judicious use of resource. No resource is unlimited, whether it is human resource, whether it is literature, whether it is funding, whether it is infrastructure, it is spacing. Whatever it is, comes to in a limited format. Maximizing uses with minimum resources is what you need to do, so that judicious use is there, integrity, and of course publication. So that's how it takes care of this. Once you do that, the author's responsibilities around the expertise, how they come in forward, have they done some kind of such similar research? No, I mean, one doesn't get a gift authorship or a ghost authorship. That's another area of publication ethics which we fall into a prey. Some people just come along, they sit and chat, discuss matters, so you don't offer an authorship to them. How the authorship is to be listed on the paper is something we have to decide upfront, not later on. There were issues, you know, sometimes that you take up a funding from international institution, and then you leave the institute or you retire, and the research continues because it is spaced over for 10 years or 12 years. And in that case, then you come back and say, well, I need to get the first author because I initiated it. So this has to be discussed upfront, so there are no such problems. If you go to Office of Research Integrity, you find so many such examples of author collaborations and author fights, which are sometimes do not get resolved at all, and they lie behind like this. So it's always better to discuss these things. So there are committee on publication ethics, which will talk about publications. You need to assure and go that and refer to this. And there are ample of places where librarians can come up with these ideas, show them the areas, show them how this comfort is discussed, what is the issues, and how these were resolved. So they can upfront resolve. So the best thing is to have author guidelines for every institute, and a librarian can contribute to that. So that's what we had done in our place. We tried to work it out for our ethics committees, because I had been an ethics committee member for almost a decade with Tata Hospital. I was their member secretary for 8 years. And this all started, you know, the ethics became very stronghold during 2006 and 8. So that's how it became. So publication ethics, everybody knows, it also comes, you do a research very well, but you don't publish it well, or you have misconceptions, you don't cite it well, you cite only yourself, you do a salami slicing of publications. They are all ethical concerns. Apart from citing or plagiarism and copyright violations and compliance, all these things. So when you do a research and there is an ethical oversight, that you do a research process, you do away with one particular process and jump onto the another. That is an oversight. So that's a violation of the research method that was done, placed in first place, and you have not followed. That's an ethical concern, because the outcome of this data may be not very open and good, or maybe it may pick up some weeds and then you don't do. So that's why, we always advise our research students that if you're doing a questionnaire study, please walk to the statistician, show him the questionnaire, show the person the objectives and aims and objectives of your study and your hypothesis, because the statistician is ultimately going to convert your questionnaire into a number and analyze it for you. And at that time, your p-value may be, your student t-test may not come well, and that becomes a difficulty. So research method is starting from the first one, going methodically about everything. That is embedding ethics into your research. And that's what we do when we sit on ethics committees. We review all these things. We have our comments, we make modifications, because the objective of ethics committees is to support research and not to stunt it. So when you support research, you allow them to grow and give them good ideas, allow experts to make comments and support, and make them available for them. And then that is approved. So pre-publication discussions. When you do publications, you are on the editorial board, there is a problem there too. If you have a conflict, you have to declare and not review that paper. If you are from the same institution and a paper from the same institution comes to you, do not review, declare conflict of interest. Editors and reviewers also have a conflict of interest, and this has to be declared and not taken over. So every publisher have their own guidelines about these things, what editorial process and review process should be, and how your declaration should be upfront. If you're not an expert on a topic, even then you must say that this is not your area and you will not be able to review, or you will not be on the editorial board of that paper. So these are what post-publication discussions. You will find ample of such examples in the Office Research Integrity and COPE office, cope.org. You'll find ample of them, and you know how to get them solved. So this is what is about ethics. So when we talk of IAC members, so if you have an ethics committee members, the committee in your office, if you're a healthcare institution, then the ethics committee members also need help. They need literature review, they need medical dictionary, they need dictionaries in local languages, because there are patient information sheet has to be written in a language with a 7 standard student can understand. And that's a very simple, looks simple, but it's most difficult. People keep on writing medical terms into it. And that's where you can give your expertise, create a special word list of translated words and make them available. That's what we did in TMH. There is difficulty. There are workshops that we conducted for them, and that's how we surveyed. So there are training sessions for reviewers. Orientation tools were developed. We gave them a list of difficult medical terms into Hindi and Marathi or Gujarati as was required. Lot of collections we did on medical ethics for them. So it is about databases and all these things that we did. So supportive literature review. There was one example of a study on tobacco habits, and the person wanted to study small restaurants around the area, whether they allow smoking or not, and they wanted to interview or question the boys who worked in that restaurant and the owner of the restaurant. Unfortunately, they did not take the permissions of the owner, and that research was to be redone because they did not follow certain norms. So there are guidelines for medical research ethics which are recognized across the country. They are developed by ICMR. We have the 6th edition upfront on the 2017 or 18. And most importantly, it is also recognized by international food and drug administration agencies, the European agencies, as the best guideline for ethics. So one should do that. There are national guidelines, there are international guidelines, there are way of showing or representing or coming back to the ethics committee and say that this is what we diverted or we violated the methods and what needs to be done. All these are there, and it is a legal aspect, a very strong legal aspect is there for medical ethics. So one has to be very careful about it. So this is how I supported information and support in translation, compliance to national guidelines, local guidelines, and institutional SOPs, international guidelines as well, rules and regulations, the Drugs and Administration Act that was to be implemented. So we looked at that. There are a lot of regulations which keep changing. and we have a lot of knee-jerk reactions at times, but it changes and we need to implement that into our processes. So that was done. We developed our own guidelines, we developed templates for them, we made it easier for them, we created online systems for them. It's easy. They just fill in the blanks and the PIS becomes very simple. There are some things that we can do for our researchers and help them do a good things. We also gave a lot of information on drugs. See, medical information or research is more about drugs and interventions. So there was certain kind of drug for breast cancer which was widely used across the world, and suddenly US FDA said it cannot be used. And these were the reasons. And so one has to keep a watch on these declarations and news and notifications brought by different drug administration agencies, whether it could be EU, it could be FDA, it could be our own country. And this was brought to the notice of our breast unit. This is the thing that it is, then you should stop using it because we use that also. And immediately the policies for treating breast cancer patients changed because of that. So these kind of updating, there are a lot of debates on drugs that, like, for COVID, the HCQ is a big debate. Now we need to keep this information updated and keep them continuously supporting this information. Like right now, this is what I'm doing for my National Cancer Grid. I keep on collecting this information for my researchers. We tell them what are the new research, what are the 2 big trials that happened with WHO and UK, they're the most important trials. And we are collecting a lot of information as and when they give an update, we start disseminating it too. So this helps in the research that is being conducted in India on COVID as well. So this is how you support your researchers, and you need to be updated with them. And that's how it's not only supporting, but even the debates and conflicts that are being declared or retracted articles that are there, even those have to be informed to them because they get cited in their own papers and they need to add manuscript. So that is why it is important to keep a 360 watch on what is happening in your area to help your researchers do best and do it within ethical configurations. So thank you very much. That's what I would wanted to talk about ethics.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta. It was a very detailed presentation on ethics in general. You also covered pretty much on publications ethics. I think it was really a lot of insightful information for particularly medical librarians, librarians who are working in medical institutes and hospitals. So we have come one round. Each one of us have shared our views. I'm not sure if Dr. Sidmalaya is in or not.
Anand, I know. Just now I spoke to him. He is still in Niman's.
Okay, it's all right.
Some stitching is to be done.
Okay. So now I think since we have completed one round, now I would like to open the floor for questions, if any. How do we handle questions? Is there anyone from Balani's side who can really do that, or should I really pick up somebody? Okay.
Kiran here, sir.
Okay, Kiran.
Sir, a small announcements to the participants.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
now we'll be opening the chat box for question and answers to the panelists and
Okay. All right.
to shoot the questions.
In the meantime, there was an announcement to be made. So the organizer is conducting a quiz after this webinar. There will be 12 questions asked and the winners will be rewarded. And so watch out for the quiz and get ready for answering 12 questions, if I'm right.
One more thing to be added, sir, along with the quiz. So e-certificates will be provided for all the participants who have participated in the webinar. So when quiz question and the e-certificate link will be shared in the screen, sir, after this Q&A.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah. I think all of you heard, e-certificates will be provided to all participants who have registered and participated. And you will get an email related to that from the organizer. So Kiran, where do we get questions? Okay.
Chat, sir. There are a few questions in the chat box. You can open the chat box, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I see.
Sir, there is one question from Dr. Shivaram sir from NAL Bangalore.
Okay.
The question is about plagiarism is quite straightforward to detect with available tools, and there are policies. We have larger problems like data fabrication and falsification, image duplication, and image manipulation. How do you handle this kind of issues? Surprisingly, 118 papers from India have been retracted because of these issues, and interestingly, many are from reputed institutes. This is a question from Dr. Shivaram sir from NAL sir.
Okay, I can take that question. See, if you look at plagiarism, the most reputed tools are the most accepted tools worldwide to check the similarity and plagiarism are Turnitin and Authenticate, both of them from same company. And what Shivaram is asking, data falsification, data fabrication, and data manipulation. These are three areas which are very creative, and researcher intentionally does these things very creative way. All the tools, whatever tools you have in the world today to check plagiarism or a similarity and all, their scope is just limited to the text portion of the document. They cannot go beyond text. So data manipulation, data falsification, data fabrication, it remains to be unsolved thing at least at this point of time. But the way you should be looking at that is, I don't think it's right on anybody, any researcher, any guide to expect a tool to fix those things. Those are actually related to the individual ethics. As Dr. Mehta said, I'll ask Mehta also to comment on this. It is related to individual ethics. She gave a nice talk about that. So you need to be ethical in doing research, you need to be ethical in writing your report, you need to be ethical in citing whatever you use. If researcher and guide, both of them are ethical, I don't think there will be a need for really looking for any tool for data falsification, data fabrication and data manipulation. And I know for sure, being in this field, there is no tool yet, and I don't think there can be a tool in the future as well. I would like to say that. Now with this, I would like to request Dr. Mehta to add some comments.
No, Anand, I completely agree with you, because this is what I said, that it is very essential to have an integrity. A researcher must be integral. The integrity plays a very important part when you do ethics, and that's why I said the ethics begins when you think of a research question till the time you publish. So about these things, that is why what important thing is continuously train and educate your users. Constantly train and educate your users, show them what is going wrong, and also show them if that goes wrong, what happens. UGC has a gazette notification on this, and it has now extended itself for slicing publication also, or self-plagiarism also. And it talks about all these things, and for professor level, for student level, the penalty is small. But for student or faculty beyond certain group and certain percentage, they have a very strict things that almost strip you off your guideship, your position, your promotions. So it is always better that, since this cannot be caught and there can be no such tools, as Anand says, I completely agree with him. We need to keep ourselves educated and keep educating our users about this and the problems that can create because of this. We do not want floating research around in the knowledge reservoir. We want knowledge of reservoir which can be reusable and applicable. With anything such things, there can be no applicability. So that is why it's education, education and education all the time. That's the only way to help it out.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Mehta. Still, I would like to add one last sentence. If still any researcher can think I can be smart, I can cheat, everybody across the world, all journal editors, everybody, there are a lot of examples on the Wikipedia. I know one person, I don't want to take his name, but he had published about 8 papers in Nature, 8 papers in Science, and there were some 8 or 10 papers in top 10% journals. They were all about data manipulation, data fabrication, and data falsification. When peers started really, repeating his experiments, trying to get the results they did not get, they formed an international committee, and that committee took a decision of, they actually retracted all the papers. There is a very big page on Wikipedia. He was a famous researcher, and once he came to know that he has done this data falsification, fabrication, everything was retracted. So there is no shortcut in life. People should know that ethics is more important, and you may have a short-term win, but in the long run, you will not really get all the false claim whatever anybody intended to get. So that's what I wanted to add.
There is a recent example about drug research in USA. And when that study could not be repeated and medical fraternity took a lot of call on the type of data and the outcome of it, a committee was formed and sent back for that data collection. They said we are withdrawing because we do not have a good data on this. So, it gets caught very quickly. Now people are more informed about.
Kiran, if you can help us to pick up the question.
Interrupt here for a second?
Yes.
Yeah, please, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, we were talking about plagiarism, and also, of late, we have seen that people or researchers also plagiarize the tables or half tones. For example, if there's a malaria chart and there are some dots, on top, say 5 dots, we have caught people where they will turn the page upside down and present it as theirs, and instead of 6 dots, they will make it maybe 4 dots or increase to 7 dots. Now, there is a company in Japan which is trying to, which is almost ready now, a product which will actually check half tones plagiarism. So the moment you submit a project to publisher for a publishing, obviously it cannot be checked through human eyes. It's very difficult. But then because of this software which has this algorithm, and it's still at a development stage, but I'm sure very soon, maybe in a year's time, this product is under testing now, and it's more useful to biological and pharmaceutical sciences. So this should be out, and it's called iPixel. So it's, the product name could be something different, but this company in Japan is investing hugely in this product, and iGroup Thailand is also investing, is a partner in this research.
Okay.
So once this is ready, we will bring it to your notice, and maybe there could be trials, experiments done.
Okay. Is this about, to understand precisely, is this about checking the similarity of a table, right?
Yes, table or a half tone.
Yeah, table.
For example, suppose I have put a photograph of a brain, and I have shown some spots there.
Right.
Then I just change little spots, from left to right, and submit it as my own. So it can check that very quickly. Yeah.
So more useful to biological sciences.
Right.
Yes, biological and medical sciences.
Medical science.
Yeah.
So we'll watch out for that tool, Mr. Balaji.
Sure, I'll bring it to your notice. Yes. Thank you.
Anand sir, we have another question. So there is a question from Venkata Rao. So the question is, does separate library website of a university helps to market library services and research tools like plagiarism software? SPSS software. They mentioned a product name as SPSS software.
I request Dr. Gowder to take up this question.
Can you repeat, Anand, the question?
So the question is, a separate library website, when you have a separate library website in a university system, will it really help to market the tools and resources you have, and also can it be really made as a platform for checking plagiarism? So it's basically role of library website in promoting and creating impact and also checking the plagiarism.
Well, yes, it does, but it's only a part of the game. There are additional things as well. Definitely, library website. The question is whether library website is part of the institutional website or it's an independent site itself. And again, what is that you're loading onto the website? That's also another important one. For example, while talking, giving this talk, I showed one particular Rhodes University this thing. If you see the visit the library website, of course they are part of the Rhodes University site. they have given all sorts of LibGuides. See, they have got a separate section for research wing itself within the library. So there you get a lot of LibGuides, subject-wise LibGuides, etc. In that way, they will cover that. But you can also make this social media also a part of your library website to support the research activity of the institute. In that way, you can go on listing a number of ways you can use the library website for giving the visibility for the research. This is one aspect of it. The other one, what is plagiarism thing. Plagiarism, yes, it's a process in the university system or institution system, wherein before sending the article for publishing, it has to undergo this plagiarism check. Or if it is a university, if it is before submitting the thesis, it should go undergo. As Anand put it right in the beginning, whatever plagiarism tools we have got, they are all basically text similarity. A question of 8-word string checking similarity, etc. So much percentage. But one thing is sure, one may escape the eyes of the guide. In fact, we don't expect that to happen. But definitely, if the reviewer of the concerned journal is smart enough, usually they are, you cannot escape that at all. The question of integrity comes beyond that. Definitely, a reviewer, a good smart reviewer, can identify, even if an idea is stolen, he can do that. The question of string doesn't arise there. Idea is stolen, something, that's how one can, the library website definitely can help, but at the most you can announce what is the procedure for plagiarism checking, etc., and not more than that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Kiran, next question, Kiran.
Thank you, sir. There is another question from Dr. Asim Selen. So the question is, in the absence of strong national library policy, the most public libraries are still in primitive stage and way behind in applications of ICT. This has resulted in attracting the public from using the public libraries. How to improve this situation? Does this require political strong will, or where are the library associations in addressing this concern? Is People's University still a dream?
Okay, I can take up this question since I have little exposure to Department of Public Libraries in Karnataka. Yeah, what he said is correct. If you look at the public library system in India, there is a long way to go. At least we see some states are really doing very well. In fact, if you look at the library buildings at Madras, the Madras Public Library is one of the, the best in the world. Same thoughts I have with the Goa Public Library. That's also, it looks very contemporary, comparable to the best in the world. And they also have a lot of content, lot of books, they're doing all of that. But I agree with him that not every state is really, having good libraries like the way Goa has, the way Tamil Nadu has. Even Karnataka is doing very well now. In fact, during COVID period, Department of Public Libraries in Karnataka, in collaboration with the private department, they have set up a Karnataka State Digital Library, and the URL is karnatakastatedigitallibrary.org. If you go there, they have put lot of useful content to the public. I myself, I was privileged to be part of that content selection process, and you have about close to 10 lakhs videos, lot of content, and you can really register and you can get access to all those videos. They're really scaling up. In fact, they're also planning to pump in a lot of content based on feedback from the end users and all. Yeah, compared to the Western countries, particularly US and Europe, we have a long way to go in terms of public library systems, but there are a lot of very good efforts. So I think whether we belong to public library departments or not, I think we have a moral responsibility to collaborate with local public libraries and work with the public library leadership and have discussions, be collaborative, and we all together can really It may take some time, and we can work towards making public library system more meaningful, and it will be useful to more people. So that's my answer for your question.
Thank you, Anand sir. And there is one more question to Dr. Medha madam. So the question is from Dr. Sriram. So they are asking, please throw some lights on professional codes of ethics for librarians. Is there any guidelines and what are the implications?
I know of Medical Library Association, which has a code of ethics for librarians, medical library professionals. Okay. Maybe IFLA has something like this. So you need to go to them. But in India, I don't think no association has come up with any code of librarianship for Indian libraries. I have not come across any. I know I have used MLA because there is a code of ethics for medical librarians, certainly, and they deal with a lot of human data. They deal with a lot of data that needs confidentiality. They lead many of these institutional libraries across. They support patient information and patient education, and therefore they are privileged to look at so many information across the patient data, which is also very confidential data, and therefore there is a code of ethics for medical librarians. But you have to visit the MLA site. I'm not very sure about the other library professions or generally for librarians. Indian Library Association, I don't think I have seen any code of ethics for them, drawn for them. I don't know, maybe Anand or Dr. Gowder can throw more light on it. Professional ethics is about activity and how you behave and have you addressed the professionalism. So it comes in a very different way.
I haven't come across anything like that from Indian Library Associations. Yes. Maybe IFLA will sure have it. We need to go and really check there. And SLA may have it, Special Library Association.
Special Library.
Yeah, if Dr. Gowder knows any other Indian association who may have it, I don't know. Yeah, but from information point of view, they can go to IFLA website, they can look at them, and you have a Medical Librarians Association point of view. So it's not that there is no information. We have information, and you need to probably tweak them and tailor to your needs.
Well, Anand, there may not be a well-written code of ethics, but for the general librarianship, there are a number of discussions have taken place in so many ILA or ISP conferences, and even for that matter, some other conferences. Somebody would have presented a paper. In that way, it has come. Definitely, as Dr. Medha told, we don't have a well-defined written code of ethics as far as my knowledge is concerned. I didn't come across one such.
Thank you, sir. Here, next question.
Sir, we'll take one last question, sir. There
okay.
Is one question. So, from Manish Mankan. So, how do we influence the researchers to publish in open access journal? I mean, what kind of data we can share to make our point? So the question is, how do we influence the researchers to publish in open access?
I request Dr. Gowder to take it.
Yeah, I will answer this question.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. We should know, first of all, what are the advantages of open access publishing. That's the only way for us to. One thing is, once you go for open access publishing, it could be a journal specially meant for open access, like Public Library of Science. That way, if you publish, because it's open access, the libraries who cannot pay the subscription heavy amount and their clients also will be in a position. In that way, there could be some 40 to 50% of the content, even for that matter more, which is not easily accessible unless their libraries like that of IAC is very rich. Okay, that's a very the simple thing is, it gets exposed to more number of audience, more number of researchers. Thereby, it gets more number of citations, etc. In that way, you should convince the researchers to publish in open access. And another thing is, there is a misconception about open access publishing means it's a little bit low quality. No, There are open access journals having an impact factor value 7, 8, 10, 15 like that. There are a good number of examples of that kind. In the name of the open access, some of the publishers have misused that to publish the predatory journals. And once we know that we can convince our researchers the difference between open access journals and the predatory journals, which are making use of taking advantage of open access movement in a very bad way. Probably they will be. And another thing is the question of APC, article processing charges, that also comes into the matter. For that matter, even if I want to publish an article in American Chemical Society journal, I need to give some charges. So in that way, only thing is we should have some funds to manage this sort of article processing charges, whether it is open access journal or something else. Now, anyway, if once one pays article processing charges, that particular article is open to everybody. And it could be the entire journal or it's a part of the journal. Suppose Springer publishes a particular journal, which is hybrid. If somebody gives the APC charges, that particular article will be accessible to anybody in open way. So in that way, we should be in a position to convince our people. Main thing to convince is by publishing in open access journal, your quality or your level will not come down. There are high quality open access journal. Only thing is question of identifying high quality open access journals, which is of interest to a particular scientist or the researcher. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So I can add a couple of points to that. Manish Mankad's question was how authors can get encouraged to publish in open access journals. Now, I did a small study in IISc. We publish about 500 articles per year. About 20% of our articles are getting published in open access journals. I think that is same with IIT Chennai, Kharagpur, Kanpur and all old IITs. Now, the interesting fact is I also looked at how much it will cost me. In science, Professor Sharath is here. In science journals, if you want to make your article open access, it will cost anywhere between $2,500 to $3,000. Now, on 500 articles, so it will be, if I calculate how much we spend for 500 articles to make public, is about 60% of my total budget. So my point is, open access is becoming very expensive. It's more useful and beneficial to publisher because they are driving it as an additional revenue generating model. Now, coming to the money spending, in IISc we had a discussion and all. I don't think as an organization we are funding a lot of APC charges. A lot of APC charges in many cases they will come from their projects, funded projects. So when they get funding to do projects and all, it's also part of that grant, and they have a freedom to really use that money to pay for APC charges. And I reiterate what Dr. Gowder said. APC, everybody knows that APC means that doesn't mean that that's a low quality journal. APC, in fact, in many organizations, APC charges are being paid only if and only if that is a first quartile journal or in the top 10 journals kind of a thing. So that's how it works. Now, I also would like to request Professor Sharath to add some value on this, some points on this. As an author, what do you think of, open access thing? Would you like to pay for every article you publish, or what's your thought as a researcher, as a professor? It will be very interesting to know.
Right. So there is an issue with open access because of the high costs involved. So many a times I've actually confessed to you that we try very hard to go with a begging bowl to the editors, and but these days, since they consider India to be a developing or a developed nation, they are often very reluctant about giving us sops. And currently, I am also not funded. So there is an issue here because unless we go to the top rung where you can probably get the attention of your administration or the vice chancellor in the university, to release these grants, that unassigned grants and so on. It's very difficult to publish in these. So choosing the next rung of, not say quite nature communications, but if you want to go to even biomedical optics journals or things that do have a fee, it's very difficult now. And we are often discouraged by this account.
So thank you so much for sharing your views. Am I audible?
You are audible. Anand,
Okay.
can I add a point?
Please, sir, go ahead.
Let us take the example of current science itself. Initially, current science had an IF value of something around 0.3 or so. Once it was taken up by commercial publishers, and the digital online content of that was made open access. By doing so, the impact factor of current science came up it crossed 1. That itself is a proof for convincing our people that we should go for open access. When the value came up almost 4 times, it means your visibility is more, usage is more, and thereby another thing is that I also learned from current science publishers that their subscription of hard copy went up 2 times. That itself is a proof. Okay, thank you.
So thank you, sir. I would like to request Dr. Mehta if you have any point to make, last point before we can.
No.
Okay. So Karan, we are all set.
Sure, sir. Sir, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, let me take a minute to thank panelists.
Sure.
So I would like to thank all 3 panelists for sharing the very insightful views and thoughts. And so Professor Sharath Ananthamurthy brought in a very new thought process for us. He suggested it will be nice if libraries and librarians can move from knowledge repository to helping in the process of creation of knowledge, this thing. And Dr. Gowder mentioned about everything required to really make your article more visible, more impactful. He talked about tricks, he talked about processes, and he gave a lot of tools for us. And Dr. Mehta, while talking about ethics, it was 360-degree talk. She gave a beautiful talk about ethics in general. She also talked about in detail the ethics activities in medical libraries and medical institutions, and she also gave a lot of insights. And I'm privileged to be with all my 3 very learned panelists, and thank you for being with us and making the panel discussion so interesting. And I'm thankful for views, and also I learned a lot from all 3 of you. So thank you. I would like to thank Balani in general, and also Mr. Kailash Balani for giving this opportunity for us. And I also missed Dr. Siddamalaya because we were, unfortunate that he couldn't join. But I would like to thank him as well for the opportunity. Now over to Balani, Mr.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. And thank you, Anand. That was nice.
It was pleasure.
Well, just now I received a call from Dr. Siddamalaya. He was so keen in coming, but unfortunately, the wound that has happened in the hand could not be get the dressing done in time. So he told me to express his regret and for his inability to join us. He has, as usual, he's always very active in this sort of things. And so I feel sorry for that. Anyway, Dr. Anand did an excellent job in his absence. So I also thank the other panelists and as well the Balani Infotech people, as well the audience which is running to somewhere nearly 500 or more than that, I don't know. But anyway, thank you all.
Dr. Anand, can I take a minute?
Yeah, please. All yours, sir.
Yes, thank you. So actually, I was told by my team that I can welcome the panelists and the moderator, and then I can go away. but actually looking at the subject and the discussion, I couldn't do that. So I really enjoyed this session very much. There's a lot of learning for me also, you know. So it is very interesting, and that's why I hooked on to this session. And therefore, I again, you know, like to thank all of you, sparing your time and giving such a wonderful insight into various topics that we have. And hope that once we may organize such more webinars in the future, and look forward to your support there. And also, I you know, hope that Dr. Siddhamania will recover soon, and maybe next time we can bring him in our webinar here. So thank you very much once again. Thank you. Thank you. I really
Pleasure,
enjoyed.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Now over to Kiran for his formal.
So now we are going to share the screen regarding
Okay.
e-certificates and quiz part. So now, so this the so regarding e-certificates, so you can share your details to below email ID, webinar.balaniinfotech@gmail.com. So details required: your name, institution name, location, and designation of yours. So please drop your details to this email which we have given. I will repeat once again: webinar.balaniinfotech@gmail.com. And now we are moving to quiz part. So please note down this quiz link also. So please note down, or you can take the screenshot, or you can take the picture of the link. So after this session, the form will open, so you can answer to the quiz questions. There will be 12 questions, which are selected by the panelists, and so by tomorrow we are going to announce the winners. So there will be 3 winners.
Arjun, we have 11 questions.
Yeah, no, we have 11 questions. Sorry. So you can note down the link, or you can take the picture or screen saver.
The first 3 correct answers, those who will come to us, will be the first 3 winners. So this is the race against time. You can write it down, and you can use this link to open that Google page. And whoever will send all the correct answers, first, second, third, based on the time period, those will be the winners, and they will be announced. And within 24 hours, they will be getting their gift vouchers. Thank you.
Shall we wrap up the session, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes. So many thanks to all the participants, and many thanks to all the panelists. So now we are formally closing this session. So we are conducting one more session on 30th of this month. So we'll see you all again. So thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you again, all of
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Professor Anand Bhairappa, Ishwar Gowda, Madam. Because I really learned quite a lot from all of you.
Sir, thank you so much for taking time and joining with us. It was a privilege to be associated with you.